Okay, now I'm into 6-2 part 2, and I'm going to continue with my notes. I put 6-2 part 2 here. I'm going to continue with my notes on the parallelogram chart. Now, you don't have to put 6-2 part 2 there if you don't want to, but understanding that these three concepts were in part 1, these next three are used in part 2. So we're going to continue going down, and we'll start with the fourth rule. And the fourth rule states that if it is a parallelogram, which means if we can define it as a parallelogram, then our diagonals, so you have both diagonals, and you have to know what a diagonal is. It goes from corner to corner. That's what makes a diagonal, from opposite corners. A line drawn from opposite corners is a diagonal. Both diagonals bisect each other. Both diagonals bisect each other. Okay, so what are some words that go with bisecting each other? Hopefully, you know that they could use something like, they could use the word midpoint, which is telling you that it's bisecting, okay? Which means if the diagonals bisect each other, that this piece and this piece are equal to each other, and this piece and this piece are equal to each other. It does not mean all four pieces are equal to each other, okay? It's just the diagonal being bisected. Now notice, both pairs of diagonals must be bisected. So if you get a picture and you only have one pair of congruency marks, then it's not finished. Meaning, it either isn't a parallelogram or they forgot to put the marks. Well, how do I know the difference, Mr. Frazier? If they tell you the shape is a parallelogram, that means they forgot to put the congruency marks. If they did not tell you it was a parallelogram, then they're seeing if you're going to make the mistake and put the congruency marks when you shouldn't. All right? So understanding what the picture is supposed to look like. And then you'd be putting those two pieces equal to each other. Right. The next two rules are a little goofy. Okay. So we're going to go with 5. Okay. We'll leave a space. Go with 5. And 5 is that you have one pair. So that means one pair, two sides, one pair of sides are both parallel and congruent. So what does that look like? Now you should do flashcards with these. I know you don't want to do it. Most of you don't. And I will give bonus in this section for doing flashcards. There's a lot of them. I would do a flashcard which had a picture on one side and the rule or definition on the back, and then put underneath that whether it was what made it a parallelogram. And then I'd have another one that says parallelogram and list all the rules and the definition so that you know both. Okay? And then you just study them. All right. So notice the congruency marks are on the same side. You have one pair of sides are both parallel and congruent. Now, parallel, they have to use parallel marks or tell you they're parallel. Congruent, they can use congruent sign, or they could put a number there, like 15 and 15. Okay? That tells you that they're both parallel and congruent. All right. So hopefully you know so far, so good. All right? Okay, so let's go into the last rule for 6-2 part 2. And that last rule for 6-2 part 2 has to deal with two pair of alternate interior angles. Okay? And again, these are supposed to be consecutive. Okay? Or draw them out. Now, why is that? Well, you'll see. I'm going to draw my generic shape. And here's my diagonal. I'm going to have, now that is not bisected. Okay, that is not bisected. But these are considered alternate interior angles. And that's because they make the letter Z. Now watch. There's one. Okay. Here's the other. Okay, so here was the one pair of angles. This picture represents this, and here's the other. When you have alternate interior angles, that means the sides are what? Parallel, right? Because this is parallel lines, this would be a transversal, alternate interior angles, there you go. Now, can this picture look differently? Of course it could. They could do something like this with both diagonals. But you have to pay attention to where they put the congruency marks. So for example, if they put the congruency marks here, that tells me the top side and the bottom side are congruent, right? Because I can draw my Z, and I'll go over top of it. Okay, Z. But then the other congruency marks have to prove the other two sides. See, here we go, Z. I'm going to put a third pair of congruency marks. Okay, these congruency marks would not help me because the first one and the third one tell me the exact same sides. So for example, if I draw the first pair of congruency marks, there's my Z, right? These are alternate interior. If I draw the third pair of congruency marks, the Z is going in the opposite direction, but what sides are they proving are parallel? The same two sides. So this wouldn't work. Notice, they have to be in a place that makes two pairs of alternate interior angles so that the consecutive sides are parallel, right? So when you draw the Z's, it should have the two pairs of sides. This is the hardest one, and it's not seen that often, most likely on the EOC, but never anywhere else. All right? Okay, and last but not least is a generic principle with parallel lines. Okay, and this really doesn't have anything to do with quadrilaterals, but it has to do with common sense. It says that if you have a set of parallel lines, now this is completely different than our chart, so you can put this anywhere else. This is if you have parallel lines and you draw a transversal and it's cut into equal pieces, that means every other transversal is cut into equal pieces. That does not mean all these pieces are the same. It just means whatever other line I draw through there is also cut into equal pieces. It's a pretty common sense rule. All right? It's like algebra. Whatever happens to one of the lines has to happen to all the lines. It doesn't make all the pieces of each line the same. It just makes all of the pieces on that line the same length. Okay? So if this was 3, then this would be 3, this would be 3. If this was 1, then this would be 1, this would be 1. If this was 7, then this would be 7, and this would be 7. I don't know why they throw that generic rule in there, but they do. Okay, and again, work on the skill practice, so if you have any questions, you can ask me when you first get back to class. And then when you get back to class, you'll finish the work. All right, have a good day.